G'day guys, it's Ben and Adam here from Pumped on Property. Now, we just sat down for the last half an hour sort of having a bit of a play for this podcast. It's going to be something a little bit different today. So, Adsy and I were sort of going back and forth a bit on exactly what we should be talking about. But the reality is we're going to be talking about the mindset of how wealthy people think, as well as the exact strategies or the tools and tactics they use to create financial freedom with their money. It's been a while since you've been on the show, man. How you feeling?
Yeah, really good. Excited to do another podcast. I was a little bit nervous. I was just saying to Ben that I had butterflies. Seemed a bit similar to the first one, to be honest, but we jumped around a little bit and tried to get rid of them. So feeling good, excited to jump into this one. I'm glad we got to think about it a little bit first though and spend that time, because I think this is a question that's very easily to get complicated for no reason at all. So like having that thought, even you and me running through it, it was like we were getting more and more complicated and thought, no, we need to break this down to a much simpler level and focus on, I guess, the overarching things that are really important.
For sure. Like Ads and I caught up with a couple of our clients in Queensland, and for those of you in Sydney and Melbourne, we're going to send out an email later in the year and come and catch up as well for a couple of beers and some dinner. But one of the clients was Jason, and he's an ex-Commonwealth Games gold medalist in the 200 metre freestyle. And he was teaching Adsy and I on Saturday morning after being on the beers on Friday night how to swim properly. And we both thought we could swim until we sat next to this dude. But what he was saying, remember on TV, like how people that get nervous, like the swimmers and stuff, they're shaking. And I thought they just did that to show everyone how like loose they were and ready for the race. But he's like, that's just shaking out your nerves, kind of like a duck does after it's like dove into the water, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I wonder the actual physiological or physiology behind it and how that actually works. Excuse my words, I'm trying to be too fancy once again.
Fancy.
But yeah, I wonder how that actually works. It's got to have something to do with the breath, I imagine, jumping up and down and actually clearing out that air, because we just did it then and it felt great.
I was listening to that Oprah Super Soul podcast, which I'm in love with at the moment, and she was in one of the episodes with Eckhart, and he was talking about exactly that, right? So like if two geese or ducks get into a fight, they have a fight, then they both shake it off, and because they're not humans that live in the past and the future, they shake it off, all of that energy leaves their body and they move on.
Wow, that's cool. I need to go back and rewatch that, I think.
Humans are the only ones that hold on to that stuff. It's like you had a beef with your mum when you were 10 years of age, and you know someone can hold that till the day they die. So you know, I've been like trying to shake negative energies out as they come up, because it's sort of like what, you know, everything in the animal kingdom does, and the only difference is our brain holds onto or attaches to things for a longer period of time.
Exactly. So like
letting stuff go sooner and then physically letting that negative energy out of your body, like I think would have a long-term health benefit as well, but not proven.
I always try and think when I've got those sort of thoughts or things churning through my head, is like, is this thought serving me or is this belief serving me? And I feel like that's a really good way for me personally to kind of separate myself from it a little bit more and kind of look at it a little bit, I guess, more logically or rationally.
Now, what I wanted to say, like this sort of like segued off what we're going to talk about, but you know, some people might be listening to this podcast or watching it going, you know, like, I would love to be in the position that Ben or Adsy are in, or I watch other people in the past and I'm like, man, like I'd love to, you know that much about that specific thing that person spent 10 years learning about. Like, we still get freaked out. We still don't know sometimes if it's the right thing to be doing. Like Adsy just said, like he was getting stressed out about this podcast today. Like, regardless of where you're at in your journey, whether it's the start or the end, you're still the same person all the way through, you know what I mean? Like, you're still yourself with your own little quirks and your own little insecurities. Like, I was talking to a client today, Andrew from Newcastle, and he's like, you know, talking about his property, and he's just getting started at 50 years of age. And, you know, I was like, I get physically sick every time I buy a property. Like, and he's like, Ben, you're just saying that to make me feel better. I'm like, nah, man, like I get almost physically ill just because I don't like risk, I don't like debt, and I always second guess my judgment. But what I do know, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video today, is you know, really Robert Kiyosaki sort of stuff, you know, with our own tint on it, and sort of talk about the differences in mindset, firstly, between wealthy and poor people, and, you know, how that's translated into both of our lives as well as we move through our journeys. So why don't you kick it off, bro?
Okay, no problem. So starting off, I guess, let's jump on the wealthy side. I guess we're all probably going to resonate with the poor side a little bit easier. Me and Ben both started off there, so we're working our way up the same as everyone else out there has to. But the major one that I think has served both of us very well throughout our lives so far is being solution orientated. So don't get me wrong, there's a problem that arises every hour, every second, that we're constantly having to try and work through and figure out solutions for. And it's so easy to get caught up on the problem and, I guess, acknowledging that problem too much, or really aligning yourself with the story of that problem and running with it for way too long, instead of just looking at it a bit more objectively, understanding what the problem is. If you're not in a position to make a decision on how to solve that problem, we'll look elsewhere. We'll find someone that can help us with it, that might be able to solve it completely for us for a fee, I don't know, but realistically, it's just always focusing on trying to find that solution. What's your thoughts about, I guess, the difference between those two?
Look, I think all wealthy people just move faster from problem to solution than, exactly, people that aren't wealthy. And it's just because they've got a lot of stuff going on in their world, or they've had lots of problems in the past that they've got, some wealthy people that I know could get, what would be 50 years worth of problems in a week for the average person, you know what I mean? So if you
100%.
dwell on the problem, I was catching up with Daniel, he's one of the 300 wealthiest men in Australia and is looking to become a client with us. I was catching up with him for a coffee the other day, and I was just like, mate, like I can't fathom, with the number of employees, the number of things going on. And he said, Ben, my world is just basically going from problem to solution that quickly. And he said what he does is a huge amount of Navy SEAL training. His dad was a Navy SEAL, and it's kind of instilled in him just this, elite mindset, which we'll talk about more, around just being action orientated and moving straight out of the issue into a solution. Because if he was to get bogged down by all the things that come up every minute or every hour, he'd be crushed, and he never would have got to the position that he's in now. So regardless of if you just want 50 grand a year worth of financial freedom, or you want $5 million a year of financial freedom, there's going to be problems that come up. And the sooner you just move to solution and get your brain and your thinking style away from that unhealthy way of focusing on what's wrong, the better off you'll be. And I suppose that sort of slides into the next one, like wealthy people prioritize. So what were we sort of saying there?
I guess it's like, it's simple to talk about, manage your time better, plan your life better, figure out what your next steps are going to be, what's your dream, what's this, what's that. Like, they're all really great questions and big questions that need to be answered at some point in your life. But I think we get focused sometimes on the wrong things, and we need to bring them back. And I think the best way to do that's prioritize. And we've seen that through different people throughout the history, that they're very good at focusing on what's important to them. And that doesn't mean being selfish. It might be changing the world, but they're very focused on how they think they can do that. And they will then work on how that moves forward. So it's like that prioritization, to me, is a step that most people miss. So I don't, like, it could be viewed in so many different ways, but it's just, don't acknowledge the person that's yelling the loudest at you that they want something done. It's not always the best way to do things. It might help make you feel better for a very short amount of time, but we all know what it's like when you get overwhelmed with something and you sit there trying to work your way out of it. When you looked back earlier and you could have thought, oh wow, if I'd have just changed this one step at the start, I could have solved that whole problem, or I could have worked through that whole piece of work that I needed to do much more efficiently and easy.
It's so interesting that you say that. Like, there's 3 little stories that I wanted to tell in relation to this one, because I really think that this is the number one thing that will enable you or you and your family to get financially free sooner. So I was just reading a book about the people that live the oldest in Japan. And you sort of said, and I can even hear it in your language, like, as you start moving through this journey, you start listening to what people are saying a lot closer, and you start noticing like things that are coming up from the past. And I'm going to call you on this one. You sort of said, with prioritizing, you could say that's selfish.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a belief, like, and this is just,
Yeah, true.
That's a belief that people that look after themselves are selfish from your background, that no longer serves you in any way, but you're still unconsciously carrying.
Yep.
And I think to get from the poor mindset column to the wealthy one, we've all got to go through the stuff that Adzi and I are going through. And I want you to call me out on something as you acknowledge it throughout this podcast, because we've both got stories that we carry that may or may not serve our highest and best purpose, and we are all constantly carrying that stuff too. So in terms of the first story, these people in Japan, and this is how I've let go of that story, because I had it as well.
Yeah.
Because like rich people were bad in the home that I grew up in, and they were evil, and money was bad, and money made mum and dad fight, and the environment that I grew up in school, like, and the community, no one had cash, and so it was always like out there in the, the ether.
Yep.
And so these people that live the longest in Japan spend a lot of time in their first half of their life like doing different things to find out what their life's purpose is. And so one of the things, like from a high level perspective, that I think wealthy people do is they find out earlier than most what they enjoy doing. Now, there's not many wealthy people that I know that just love making money. Normally there's a reason they started making more money, and that was because they wanted to help themselves away from where they were, or they wanted to help someone else. So on a very high level, this book helped me connect that dot, that you could do what you're supposed to be doing, and because of that have all the health and long-term benefits, but also make your way through your life, which is kind of the second thing. I was reading another book last year when I had massive anxiety called The Happiness Trap, and in this particular book they talked about not just sort of understanding your purpose, and in both books they talk about finding your purpose, not just arriving on it. Like, how the fuck do you find your purpose? You know what I mean? It's like you just keep trying stuff that's not your purpose until something feels better.
I think Eckhart Tolle touched on it maybe in that Super Souls podcast as well, which really resonated with me. And he's like, it doesn't have to be the same throughout your whole entire life.
Yeah, your purpose changes, man.
Yeah, you get some people that have that one purpose for their whole entire lifetime, and they create amazing things with that focus and that drive on the one thing. But that's not for everyone. Like,
it's not for everyone.
No, it's okay if you want to do something for 5 years and then you decide, okay, now I'm going to redirect and head in this direction instead, and that's my new purpose. Doesn't mean that your old purpose loses weight or loses importance. So if you meet someone else on a journey which that's what they're focused on, I've just, in my personal life, see that when people move to a new part in their journey, they'll look back and see someone else focusing on this still and think they've moved past them, or they're still back there.
It's something that we didn't write, but we definitely have to talk about, like that agility or that resilience, like that ability to move really quickly is definitely another characteristic of wealthy people. Like, if it's not working, it's not in line with them, or they're just not enjoying it, they pivot. Or if something external causes them to pivot quickly, then they do. But in this book, The Happiness Trap, they talked about understanding your values, and so many wealthy people I know can articulate so clearly exactly what is important to them. Now, for me, it is so simple. It's literally my family, my friends, like, which I associate as family, but, Ads is a good mate, and I'd say, like, family trumps friends like 99% of the time at the moment for me, because I've got the 3 young kids.
Yep.
And then business or wealth creation is another value for me, and within that is helping people, because I don't just like making money, I like making the world a better place, as corny as that sounds. Like, I really want to do good work.
Yep.
And then the last one is looking after my health, which used to be purely physical. Now it's, mental, emotional and spiritual a bit more as well.
Yeah.
And it's like, the sooner you understand your values, it means that as you start to do things in your environment that twist them, you can prioritize back, knowing that, like, for me, knowing what those things are, I can set up my week. And that's the third thing. Like, Ads and I are both really, really good at creating a calendar and structuring our week in a way that all of the big rocks and big tasks automatically get done. But then what I do on top of that, even though my day, I don't have to think about it because it's so structured in the way that I work, and yours is becoming all like that now as well.
Yep.
I still come in the morning, and before I even look at emails, I prioritize my day in terms of what is the big thing that needs to be done today. And that's the one thing that I'm writing down on top of the things that I'm just naturally going to move forward through. So it's kind of like purpose, values, and then day to day. Yeah. And the sooner, like, you can recognize how to prioritize your world, it means that you don't make decisions that aren't in alignment with yourself, which make you feel shit, and you can just focus and have the stamina to do what you want to be really doing long term.
Yeah, can we get into the nitty gritty just a little bit there with that? So like obviously we've got those different levels that we talked about, purpose, and then down to the day to day. How do you manage that, I guess? So it's like you're saying you create what you prioritize on a day-to-day basis. How do you prioritize on a 5-year basis, a 1-year basis? Does that...
It's a great question, man. Like, the way that I do that is, and Eckhart's helped me with this massively, because I was one of those people, like probably a lot of you guys are, which constantly lives in the future. It's like my brain just naturally wants to shoot me 5 years from now to the point where everything's cool and exactly how I want it to be.
Yeah.
But the reality is I can't be productive in the future with whether my body's there or my mind is there, you just can't be focused.
Yeah.
So I've created like a sort of system for myself where if I'm going to think about the future, you know, obviously your mind is chattering all day and I'm just trying to constantly come back to the present moment.
Yeah.
But if I want to think about my future, I actually sit down and make a planning time.
Yeah.
And I would spend an hour thinking about where I want to be 12 months from now. As soon as that hour's over, I normally come a little bit anxious out of that, a little bit excited, because it's like, fuck, I've got this big to-do list again.
Yeah.
And then I don't think about it. I just turn that into day-to-day habits. And then I've got a system, like a to-do list, where I'm just constantly reprioritizing, like maybe my 5 goals for this year. And then I just star the one that I'm working on now.
Cool.
And I don't do anything but move towards that one until it's done.
Yeah.
And that's something that's taken a lot of time, like 15 years in the business world to really get right.
Yeah.
And it's only because I've had amazing mentors or coaches that have showed me how to do that. Like it wasn't a skill that I could do.
That's awesome. Like I might share how mine works now. I've worked on this a lot as well. And I really liked what you said there about turning those day-to-day tasks into habits. That's something that I might start to focus on with the way that I do things as well. But at the moment, I read a book called The Winner's Bible, and it gets you to go through, do a certain set of activities you go through, and the end product is basically creating a book for yourself.
This book's sick, man.
It's awesome.
I still want to do this.
It's just that it's basically like a vision board, if anyone's probably more familiar with that concept, but there's a few more activities in there, and it really helps you focus on creating that plan and your prioritize and a little bit longer into the future. So I'm not going to get too detailed into that, but I'll update that book once a year or create a new book once a year. So for me, that's my longer term. That's really thinking out into the future. It's putting in place, I guess, controlling my mindset, controlling my focus, controlling my direction with that. And then to step that back, I will create a set of rolling goals, which tend to be more of a focus to achieve within 1 year. And then on further from that, I'll have a rolling set of to-dos. So my goal with that is to create 1 new to-do per day and to tick 1 to-do off the list per day. So it keeps it top of mind that you're always trying to achieve certain things, but it's only one. Like that's one thing that I need to make sure I'm doing, and I'll make sure that to-do relates to my goal that I'm trying to achieve to my year, which helps achieve the vision that I'm focusing on in the Winner's Bible. So it all interacts, and it's so simple for me to follow on a day-to-day basis. It just takes perhaps a day or 2 of my time once a year to update the Winner's Bible, and then day to day creating that to do, and maybe a few hours once a month, or maybe even once every few months, to just check on those goals and see how they're tracking along.
But how fun's that day that you create your future? Like you must look forward to that every year.
I love it.
Like I love my planning day. I never ever start my year without knowing what I want to achieve that year, and that's something that I've been doing now for about 8 or 9 years. And it is so powerful, like how many things that you can do just by knowing or prioritizing how you're going to spend your time and attention that year.
100% agree.
It's crazy. So the opposite of prioritizing, which is what wealthy people do in the way that they think, is just winging it. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes of all time from Jim Rohn is, you know, it's not the blowing of the wind, but the set of the sails that determines where you go. And so many people that are just winging it, like, if you think about that for a moment again, like it's not the blowing of the wind, it's the set of the sails that determine direction. So we're all in the same wind, right? But some people just tweak their sails so they're heading where they want to go, and other people are just getting blown out to fucking sea. And so, you know, poor people just constantly wing it. You ask them what their plan is for their week, for their day, what are their goals for their year, and when they can't tell you like that quick, it's either because they don't want to, because they're holding it close to their chest, and there's plenty of wealthy people that I know that just never talk about that stuff, which is cool.
Yep.
But if you don't know where you're going, how can you arrive anywhere? And you don't have to know exactly how you're going to get there. Like, you know, I've got some friends that I'd put into the poor category, at least financially, but really wealthy in terms of lifestyle and who they are like as a human. Like, we're just talking about money here. We're not talking about character in any way, which is completely different.
Yeah.
But they can't, you know, you don't get in the car, right, and drive from Sydney to Melbourne knowing exactly how you're going to get there. You just all being able to see every step of the journey. You just have to physically drive what's in front of you, trust that the map's going to work out that you're following and get there. But for some reason, when it comes to making money, people want to not just look at where they are and where they want to be, but obsessively plot every single step of the journey without knowing what they can't see, which is probably like 6 to 12 months up the line.
Yeah, I feel like it's like Tony Robbins talks about how important faith is, and so that can come into it to a certain degree, and I think that's very important. But if you don't have the faith, it's still just a confidence there that you're going to keep working towards wherever you want to get to. Like, if it's important to you, just accept that that's important to you and work towards it. Like, work. Like you're going to be working regardless. Like, work towards something that's important for you, and you'll find that the motivation builds and builds, and it's that action creates more and more motivation, and it gets to a point where things do get easier. And like I'm sure you can relate that like at first it felt like, oh, so much planning. I want to understand. I want to know the potential pitfalls, so I don't feel like I'm wasting 6 months of my life if I can do it in 1 month. And you try and over plan, you overthink about efficiency, and like you quickly get to a point where you haven't taken a step forward and you've wasted that whole 6 months. And it's just like, even if you decided to take that first step forward, you're still further ahead than thinking about it for 6 months. Whether it ends up being a mistake, you're still at least working towards something, and you will learn and you will grow and you will pick up lessons along the way.
Or you could just literally listen to a couple of our podcasts, understand exactly how to invest, and then just do that. Yeah. You know, we've both stuffed up, and I've made some huge mistakes. Like, why do you have to learn those the hard way? Like, we put out a podcast earlier called The 4 Rules of Property Investing. 90% of the things that I've learned from the history of the Australian and international markets is in that one podcast. Like, if you're just starting out as a first time, second time, third time investor, and you want to understand how to dodge most of the big bullets, you know, that's just a really, really simple way in an hour to sort of get that info. So check that one out. I don't think we'll spend much time on this next one because I'm just conscious of, you know, this is like a 3-hour podcast if we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Wealthy people manage their time, and poor people are always busy.
Yeah, well, I don't think we need to go on too much. We've really touched on that a lot, and I guess we wanted to talk about prioritization first, because a lot of people, I find, get caught up in managing your time, working your calendar, figuring out when I'm going to do this, when I'm going to do this, how can I find time for everything, and forget about that first step of prioritizing what's the actual important things I want to spend the time on. So once you know what's the priority, then it's a matter of just doing what we do in our day-to-day lives anyway, but being conscious that that priority is important, and just as important of getting your kids to school on time and to making sure you eat healthy or exercise. It's something you can just add in to your week, which I don't know. I don't know too many people out there that don't manage their time. It's almost impossible to do so. There's some that are better or worse at it, obviously, but
the world runs on a clock, and most people have to conform to someone else's clock or their own.
Yep.
You may as well just conform to your own clock, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, if the world's running on the same 24 hours, like I dropped the kids 20 minutes too late to school today. That's pretty much me, because I take the kids to school 5 days a week, and I, unfortunately, like, they're probably like at least 5 to 15 minutes late every day. Like, which is a really bad precedent to set, and I've got to sort that out. But, you know, like, the reality is we're running 2 clocks, and I'm sort of running more on my own time than the world's time, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And that's, like, that might sound really bad out there to the parents. They're like probably shaking their finger at me at the moment, but there's some other stuff that we do in the mornings which I prioritise as much as, like, the roll call in the first 5 minutes of school. Yeah. Or maybe I'm just making excuses and I need to sort my shit out.
maybe you need to prioritize. Like I reckon the prioritize is there. Obviously, it's just a managed time thing, and when you spend a lot of time prioritizing and picking all these awesome things that you know is very important, you want to focus on, managing time gets harder and harder. So you got to get better and better at managing that time.
My face is going red. I feel embarrassed even verbalizing what I just said. Just sort my shit out and get the kids to school on time is like my new to-do list. So a lot of wealthy people take accountability for their own life. You know,
Ben just did it.
Yeah, I suppose I was like accepted that I've been making mistakes and I've just decided to change it.
Yeah.
And from tomorrow morning I get another chance, and every other day for the next 20 years to drop these kids off on time. But you know, like there's an accountability thing there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, you know, it's one thing that I've become very good at, and it's one thing that all people that end up healthy, financially free with good relationships in their life do. They just live above the line and take accountability for the decisions that they make, whether they work out good or bad. It's not someone else's problem. It's not the world's problem. It's not the market's problem. It's just the nature of being in this sort of, you know, game or industry, or, you know, this need that I have or you have to do something different than what other people do.
It's like, it's comfortable to say it's someone else's problem or whatever else. Like, I'm not going to lie, it's so uncomfortable always being accountable, and it grows and grows. Like the relationships you build, you become more and more of like the accountable person. Like I've noticed in my own life with friends, with family, that the more you're willing to take on a problem or even someone else's problem and focus on dealing with it and being accountable for that problem, the more they come finding for you. So it kind of all works together, and hence why prioritization is so important, because you will have people yelling at you to focus on their problems rather than your own problems. So being accountable is not just so much about, I guess, everyone. It's also just about you as well. So I guess I'm getting a little bit lost with this one, and I'm sorry if I'm confusing here, but I guess it's just something that I've been really working on at the moment, and it's more so about not just being accountable for anything and everything you can be. It's prioritizing and deciding what you want to be accountable for and using that accountability to serve you and to help you get closer to where you want to be.
There's two parts of that. Like, as you said, there's the external part, and I pride myself on being a man of my word. But, you know, like we said, we're all not perfect, and I could definitely manage my time better, which is, I know, is a characteristic that a lot of wealthy people have. But, you know, in terms of this accountability, like, if you become a person of your word and you show up when you say you're going to show up and you actually do the things that you need to do, I think that's a beautiful way to live and a beautiful character to have. But there's also accountability in yourself. It's kind of like, you know, it's not always that fun to not have beers or to not eat crappy food or to go to bed earlier or to wake up and be disciplined around a morning routine or to start your day instead of just jumping into whatever the world's throwing at you, and to, you know, breathe, to prioritize your day, to set goals, to actually consistently work towards those goals, and then stay back or do extra if you need to because you haven't achieved what you said you were going to achieve for yourself.
Yeah.
But it makes your character so much stronger and it enables the results over time. It's kind of like a snowball going down a hill. It just exponentially compounds if you become that type of person. Not even so much on the external world's perspective, but just in your own internal world. So another thing that I believe wealthy people do, at least my experience, is they are present. Because they value time so much, they don't waste it. So if you are with someone who's wealthy and they've made time to spend time with you, they are generally highly present because they're trading their most valuable commodity, which is time, to be with you.
Yeah.
And I've found that, you know, you can only live in anxiety or a depressed state for so long before you either get consumed by it and that just is you, or the story that you've told yourself is you, or you actually figure a way to, you know, get back to your true self. Like, you know, there's not many children that are depressed. There's not many children that are highly anxious unless they're growing up in an environment which is like imposing that on them.
Yeah.
So we've all been children once. We've all been pain-free. We've all been able to live purely in the moment. We've all been able to build great relationships with other people without thinking about it. We've all been able to like live healthy and move every day. What's the difference between now and then?
Expectations? I don't know.
Yeah, that's not a question. That's just like, what is the difference? Like, expectations, life, pressures, like, just being present has been the number one thing that's enabled me to get out of what I thought was probably the darkest stage of my life with anxiety last year, to a point where most days I can't even remember that I was there ever. Like, it's crazy the difference. It's like black and white differences now.
I love it as a practice as well. Like, it's just
day-to-day practice, isn't it?
It just feels good doing it as well. Like, you come out of it and you just feel so much more aligned and thinking. So that's kind of what I think about with presence. But I feel like I'm still either really working on that and working towards being more present.
So is the Dalai Lama, bro.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, everyone's working towards presence because we've got these minds that just want to chatter.
Yeah.
They want to go back to the past. They want to live in the future constantly.
Exactly. And I guess it's just... That's a whole nother journey. I don't want to get too caught up on that one. Do we even really want to unpack that right now?
Not in this one, but we will in a future one. Like, you know, the sooner you can find your presence, you know, those Oprah Super Soul podcasts with Eckhart Tolle have helped me find mine. That book, The Happiness Trap, has really helped with some of that stuff. Some of these books I've been reading about the people that live the longest have also been helping, but simple practices like, you know, yoga, like breathing, like being mindful, like as thoughts come in to your mind about the future or the past, not letting them have weight and attaching to them.
Yeah.
You know, has all been helpful for me.
Yeah, and for me, mine was, like, I don't know if this can relate to everyone out there, but mine specifically was addressing issues. Like, I had a bad habit, and I guess this comes back to, like, prioritizing, managing time. Once again, it all kind of links in, but I had a bad habit of making a decision to make a decision later.
Yeah,
So it's like, okay, am I going to go shopping this afternoon? I don't know, I'll figure it out once I finish work.
Yeah, we're so different like that, eh?
Like, this is something that I'm working on, sort of thing. Like, it's... Do I make that... Like, that's an example. It's not something I'm actually dwelling on right now. But
are you going shopping this afternoon?
No, I'm not.
Okay, cool.
But I can guarantee, like, everyone's guilty of it out there. It's you make a decision to make a decision later, and it's just adding future work that doesn't need to be there. Like, just make the fucking decision. Like, it's that simple.
And that's so interesting, bro.
Or make a decision that you need more information. That's making the decision. It might be, okay, I need to learn more before I can make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that again puts it out to the future. Or, you know, you're using, like, what happens when I get anxious is I default back to a past version of myself, which is like a survival mechanism that most people go back to. And it's either, you know, things, beliefs, habits, etc., like decision-making patterns that have worked for you in the past that don't work for you now, or just stuff that you learned from your parents growing up that you just naturally default back to. Yeah. And so challenging these things and just recognizing that, of course, there's going to be times when you're there, but for me, you know, wealthy people do bring it back to the present. And I'm talking about conscious wealth here. We're not talking about wealthy people that just hustle and work and live in anxiety and cortisol and just, you know, effectively just constantly burnt out, except their ego is strong enough to drive them through that burnout.
Yeah.
I'm talking about people like you guys and us that, you know, see wealth as all-encompassing. Like, wealth to me is, you know, a financial position, yes, but quality of relationships, physical body, like mind, like all-encompassing, not just this traditional, like, that person is a millionaire, it ticks that wealth box or whatever.
Yeah, and yeah, I apologise if this rubs people up the wrong way, but it's not hard to make a lot of money. Go out there, work 80 hours in a job where you get a high hourly rate, and you will make the money you want. But like you've just said, you're not gonna have a wealthy abundance in your life. You're just gonna have a big bank account, a lot of work. If you're a smart investor, you may have put that money in good places, securing something in the future. But I don't know, it's a trade-off, and I get worried when you're trading something off right now for something in the future for not the right reasons. I like to be a bit more conscious about that, and knowing that, yeah, you can go out there and just overwork yourself, and I've been guilty of doing that in the past.
We've both done it.
Yeah, we've both done it.
I'm sure most of you have as well.
Yeah, and I know that you're all thinking, how long can that last though? Like, when you're in that mode, you might figure out a way. Your ego might drive you to a point where, yeah, I can keep this going. I can push myself where I'm going to keep going through this for a very long period of time, and you'll get there. But it's it's not what I subscribe to. It's not what I want to do. And I guess that's coming back to prioritizing, making those choices of how you want to spend the time in your life and whether you want to make those trade-offs, because the people in my life that I've seen in the past make those trade-offs continue to make those trade-offs right now, today, rather than make a change in that future point in their life.
I completely agree with you, man. I think it's a good one, and it's a slippery slope. Like, I've definitely traded too much time in the past. I reckon we both have been guilty of that, and I'm glad that I have a value system or a network around me of people that can hold me accountable to actually get myself out of that if it does happen. Or just a way of looking at things, which is, you know, it's more than one thing. So that kind of like perfectly ties into another thing that wealthy people do, and you've sort of really got me on this page. Like, I've probably been talking to everyone about this one since you talked about it with me. So you just went through a knee reco, and then you started to study professional athletes in America, and a big part of the way that they train now is, and it's the way that the Russians have been beating Americans in lots of sports for a long time, is consistency over effort. We were talking to Berwin, one of our clients from Byron Bay, about this on Friday, or I was on Friday night, and he sent me a Joe Rogan podcast on this concept.
Cool.
And his concept was, you can go to the gym, for example, like I like to work out in different ways. And one of the ways I used to like to work out was go to the gym, train a bicep. Like, this is a long time ago, but this is how warped it is. I'd literally go to the gym and train a bicep and a tricep, two small muscle groups on my body in isolation. And I would do like 5 exercises for the bicep, 4 reps of each exercise, 10 reps of each exercises for 4 sets.
Yeah.
And for anyone that doesn't train, that's just a hell of a lot of lifting stuff with one arm. Like an hour of lifting stuff with one arm. And then I do the other side of the other arm. Like, it's just
and
gnarly.
that's balance, right?
And you do that once a week, and you'd look really good. And like, at that time in my life when I was single, like, looking good in that way meant something to me. Or I had all the time in the world, pre-kids, pre-business, to just spend an hour and a half at every second day or every day at the gym, and it was fine. I was prepared to trade that time. But then over time, it made my body not good. And so what Berwin was saying, what you've said, and what these Russians do is, you know, instead of going to the gym and doing 4 sets of 10 pull-ups, doing 40 pull-ups in one day and being so sore for the next 3 or 4 days, they just do 10 pull-ups every single day. It's like this mindset that wealthy people have that poor people don't. It is a marathon that you're running if you want to actually get financially free. It's at least 10 to probably 30 years for the average person. But most people take it like a sprint, and most people aren't even trained sprinters, you know what I mean? They just sprint, get completely burnt out, and then when they're recovered, sprint again. And it's like, it's this long, slow burn financial freedom, and every wealthy person that I know that actually can sustain it ends up getting to that point where they're just consistently doing a little bit, but very, very regularly.
Yeah, it's just consistently doing the right actions that you know are going to get you a result, instead of being like, I guess the opposite is, okay, I want to just make sure that I still do this. This is important to me, but you're not going to do it every day because you don't have the time. There's all these other things to bother with, but it's important and I'm going to do it, until it gets to a point where perhaps you haven't given it enough love or attention, and then you have to put in a lot of effort, a lot of time to get it to where you feel comfortable with, versus the other mentality, which is putting that little bit of effort in each day into a routine which feels comfortable. So then when you get to that point, if you feel like you don't have the result you need, you tweak the level of like effort, or the level of, I guess, or the action you're putting in on a consistent basis to get the result you want, versus instead of saying, okay, I've just put in 2 whole days of really hard work to get to where I want to be, and I'm not there yet. Okay, I've got to put more time in. I've got to work harder at it. Next time I'm going to have to put 3 full-on days in. I don't have 3 days to spare. You create these things that don't need to be there because you're not actually going back and doing the things that we've talked about earlier in the video, like prioritizing properly, managing time, accountability, being present. They all link in to help that consistency go through a process. If you want to go and explode everything once a month and spend a whole weekend trying to change your life, good luck.
Yeah, you know, you might change it for that weekend, but you actually didn't achieve anything because you didn't get outside of your head or focusing on the future to the actual day-to-day or week-to-week tasks that you need to do this stuff. And we'll talk about them in terms of the tactics in a minute.
Well, it's just going to require you to do it over and over and over again in that same way. Like, you're not going to do it differently. You're going to keep repeating until you get over it and say, this isn't working. Move on.
So many, people that I know that aren't in a strong financial position go through this huge spurts of effort planning for how they're going to do something, and then they don't do anything because they believe that planning or thinking about stuff is action. Like you guys watching this and listening to this, that's cool. Like I listen to a lot of good stuff as well, and as it does help. But at some point, you've either got to do something or get some help to do something to achieve what you want to achieve, because you can call it information overload, you can call it analysis paralysis, you can call it learning, but there's 50% of the personality types are just addicted to learning. And learning is not progression. Learning is foundation setting so that you can grow. But if you just keep pouring the foundation and then not build anything on top of it, like, you know what I mean? Like you'll be, and that's the poor dad mentality, that's the poor dad mindset, and that's the difference. And I've got so many people in my world that just absolutely love education, and I do as well. I just also like doing stuff because I know that every year is another year that I'm away from my family and kids, and another year that I have to work in the future. You know, I might not always be as blessed as I am now to do what I love doing every day.
Yeah. I'm so guilty of loving education too much, and it sounds a bit lame saying it that way, but it's an addictive thing, and I think anyone can relate to it. That once you get down that path, you get really excited about the possibilities and about learning more and about like really just trying to get a big picture idea of everything.
Because your mind is growing, but your results aren't growing.
No, like I think it's clear you got to understand that when you get to a certain point, there's a difference between education and planning. And once the education phase is over, or you feel comfortable with the level of education you have, you need to put that education or that knowledge into practice by creating a plan which you on with your own timeframes can follow through on, without, like we're mentioning, having to do it on a weekend that consumes all of your time and disrupts the rest of your life. It's got to be realistic. It's got to be something that you can work through. And I don't know, I just think it all links together quite seamlessly.
Yeah, but you know, why the education is so important, man. And I also believe you're a highly action-orientated person too. Like you don't just get caught in education, and neither do I. Like you and I and a lot of people listening to this have an ability to understand different ideas and then go, okay, you know, a bit of this podcast, a bit of that podcast, a bit of this book, a bit of that documentary. That's kind of like a loose idea. Now I'll formalize that in terms of a strategy that aligns with my risk profile, with my values and what I want to achieve, and then I'll get on with doing it. And we're both doing that. We've both been doing that for a long time.
Yeah.
You know, just a lot of people can also just get caught there thinking that education is results, and it's very different. And I just want to be aware of that, because I'm a person that's probably read literally 2,000 books, like at least. I reckon we've both read a lot, listened to just I won't say hundreds of thousands because that's not true, but like tens of thousands of hours of audio shit, of videos, of just so consistently for so many years over time. It's just a daily habit for me. Like it's what I do, it's what you do. We just keep growing. And like the more you learn, the more you do earn in the future. But there was a point where I just had to get on with it.
To be honest, like you say that I'm very action orientated, but I go back to that point in your life as well that I remember as very clearly. And us
dragging around the bag of books.
It's a bit past that, and just discussing at the time, and there was such a switch in your mindset, and I'll never forget it. And it was purely that, look, I've spent so much time learning all these things, learning so much and having all this knowledge that I'm so excited to implement. I just need to start doing it. And it wasn't that you want to change something. It was more so I need to take action with what I know. And I don't know if that was a confidence thing or what was that for you? Was that a decision, or was that more something else that it felt like the time was right, or whatever else?
It was a combination of things. But I do remember that moment like it was a massive shot in the arm. I think I was like 24, and I just went from just obsessed with learning to obsessed with learning but actually doing stuff as well. And I think it was after I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I'd been reading so many other things for so many years that I just went, now it's property. And until I fully understand property, there'll be nothing else that I focus on. And it took me 7 years after that, maybe 8 years. Like I wish I could say this properly, but the penny really only dropped last year for me with property. It was like 10 years of focusing on property. You know, we had a very clear strategy, but all of a sudden I was like, okay, I understand enough about the history, the rules, the cycle, what works and what doesn't work, and what my risk profile is and what I like doing, that it is just so clear. But, you know, I started acting at 24. I bought my first 2 properties that year. I acted for so long without knowing what the hell I was doing, because these types of podcasts and videos didn't exist. You know, like, so I had to kind of create something where now you can just listen to like the 4 rules of investing video and get 90% of what, you know, took me 10 years to learn in 1 hour. That's what the great thing about this modern world is. Cool. So sliding from there, one of the things that, you know, we've noticed that wealthy people do is they are open to actually getting ideas and advice from different people.
like when we were talking about this, we had take advice as something that wealthy people do quite well, but I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword as well. They also give advice quite well in the right scenarios, but they don't give it unless they're asked for it, sort of thing. And I guess that's an important part that we've noticed, is that wealthy people will ask for advice and then they'll take that advice on board. Whereas on the flip side, it's more so, I guess maybe you're questioning your position a little bit in society or whatnot, but whatever you know, you like to try and tell people as much as possible. I know this and I know that, which is fine. It's awesome to get that out sometimes in the right conversation. It's great. But when you're giving a lot of other people advice, it's hard sometimes to receive advice back from them. And I personally think it's harder to learn if you're always out there giving everyone advice. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, like, particularly in this space, like if we talk about the investment world and the becoming financially free world, it's kind of like, and I've talked about this before in other videos and podcasts, it's kind of like finding like a really unhealthy personal trainer with a gym full of personal trainers that look exactly the way that you want to look and like live the way you want to live, and then choosing the really unhealthy person. It's kind of, you know, I know that's really brutal and black and white, but, you know, what so many people do is they take advice from people that haven't actually achieved what they want to achieve yet, or that aren't on the way to achieving it. So sometimes there's that lag effect where you're very, very close in terms of the results in your life from getting to where you want to be. And that's where Adam and I both are. Like, we're both still absolutely working towards financial freedom. We're not there yet, but we have a plan, and it's just a matter of time and discipline now, and following the things that we've talked about in this podcast. But so many other people don't have a plan. They haven't started, they're not halfway through it, or they're not close to the end, and they're still hammering out advice. And these people could be disguised as our parents, in my case, a lot of good friends, a lot of colleagues at work. Sometimes it's the hairdresser, sometimes it's the bank manager or the mortgage broker, sometimes it's your accountant or solicitor or whoever in your life that comes in this credible looking package, but behind the scenes has no idea what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah, like, trust isn't absolute across all categories. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I trust your advice in a lot of areas because we've known each other for a long time, but there's still areas where...
You don't ask me for some stuff.
Yeah, I'm not like, and if you tried to tell me about it, I'd be like, no thanks.
Yeah, no thanks.
It's just like, I guess it's finding the right person to accept that advice from, and to not just opening the doors up to, I need advice on where to take the next step in my life. Let's open the doors to every man and his dog that's out there that wants to offer me some advice, and take it all on board. Some of it might be gold, but you're still doing the filtering, which is a hard thing to do when you're coming from a place of wanting information or wanting some advice. If you're then filtering what's good and bad advice, are you really in a position to do that filter or to make that decision? It's,
you know, sometimes you are, because like, if you're semi-intelligent and you've got some sort of intuition, then you'll be a good investor, you know what I mean? Like, investing isn't rocket science, and there's a lot of people that are just getting started that, you know, have a great skill set in other areas of life that immediately transfers into property. They just get the stuff that we're talking about, or the stuff that they're listening to, and it's like, oh, you know, I've just been waiting to hear that.
Yeah.
Now I'm ready to go. So I don't want to like write off everyone, but, you know, on the flip side, it's being aware of which advice you take when you also give advice, I think, and also just being receptive that I don't know everything. Like, I'm constantly learning. Like, yesterday we watched that Phil Anderson Harry Dent debate, which was so sick. That was like Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman for me. It's kind of like two of the, you know, best guys in the world from a cycles perspective, just going head to head based on the way that they see things going over the next 5 years. And there was some things that, you know, I'm sort of more on the Phil's corner of things. But there were some things that Harry said that I hadn't heard before that I was like, wow, that's like really interesting information. I don't know where it sits, but I'm constantly open to receiving different ideas, and I'll immediately modify my strategy if there's a better idea.
Yep.
Where a lot of people that everyone knows sort of draw a line in the sand, I know this stuff and I'm not changing. And as they get older, they just become like cement. Like, they just can't pivot, and that's what, you know, creates a life on the pension effectively, because I don't know anyone that's wealthy that isn't constantly learning and growing.
I think that's a really important point you touched on a little bit back as well, about when to give advice. I think that's a really important point also. So it's like, say if you're thinking that you're an expert in a certain area, you want to pass on that advice, that's great, sure, do it. But don't get confused with information versus advice. Like, you could be out there learning something that you find really interesting. That doesn't put you in a position to then go and advise your friend about it. Like, I read a book, I read A New Earth a long time ago by Eckhart Tolle, and at the time I found it so interesting and I was almost obsessed with the information he had in it. I did not go around and talk to anyone about that. Not because, like, I told them to pick up the book and read it, and it's amazing, but I didn't go out and try and preach and explain those ideas because I wasn't in a position to do so. All I was going to do was probably turn people off it rather than get them excited about it.
Yeah, and like, I'm a big information sharer, but it's never advice, and anything online that we're doing is just ideas and information. Anything we do with our clients is the same. It's never, you should go and do this, because there's 10 or 20 different ways for every person listening to this to go and do stuff.
Exactly.
And it's like, life is kind of a pick your own path or adventure based on the information that you have at that time when you start making decisions. And over time, with experience, your decisions become better. And so, you know, just being open and receptive to new ideas is important to me. And obviously, with both of our learning backgrounds and education being a key value for both of us, it's easy to take new information in.
Yeah, and I guess to just not accept it, if you know what I mean. Like, the more information you take in and you're constantly consuming, especially if you think it's great information, you then start to realize, okay, this is fantastic, but I still need to make a choice about whether it's relevant for me and whether it's something that I'm going to implement into myself or into the way that I do things moving forward.
You know, from a property investment perspective, which is my focus, I hear things non-stop. Like, you know, I'll talk to 20 to 30 either clients or people that have booked strategy sessions with us a week. And then on top of that, I'm getting the emails, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm consuming content. Like, I take it all and then I decide what I'll allow in. And most things, now that I've got a clearer strategy just for myself, don't make as much sense. It doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge them, I don't take them in, and if they're a better idea, incorporate them. But you know, once you get sort of clearer on certain things, then it's kind of like sifting through the advice for the little, you know, bits of gold that are still left out there, as opposed to everything coming in and feeling like gold when most of it's rubbish.
Exactly. And it's just, I think it's just like finance, it's so relevant, and with wealth creation and investing, like, I think it's really, really important to take this seriously. But outside of that, it's still your life. Like, I see so many people that get torn back and forth by the different people in their little space or in their environment that they just take on advice here, they're going in this direction now, then they'll take advice there and go in that direction. So I guess it's just filter, like you said. Bruce Lee has a cool saying, and it's, I believe it's along the lines, I couldn't tell you exactly what it is, but it's take in take in everything, let go of what you don't need, but only hold on to what you actually want, or what's actually important to you and you think's going to help you moving forward. Maybe even don't even listen to what I just said then. Look up Bruce Lee and read a little bit about his life, and you'll pick up the message much better, because that was a bit off track. But
I fully get what you're saying, because I was looking at the board behind us and just thinking about some of those other things and how this fits in. Like, taking advice is really powerful, to keep learning, but also recognizing that once you understand your big picture, your values, your priorities, and where you sit across a few things, and that just takes time and experience to get to that point.
Yeah.
Then just recognizing that, you don't need everything. It's actually very, very simple. You'd be shocked how simple it is to become wealthy or financially free through property if you knew what we knew. And we try and share all of that. There's nothing we don't disclose on these podcasts or these videos on YouTube or through our Facebook or Instagram pages, because we want the best for everyone listening to this stuff. It shouldn't be, the old school way of creating wealth, which is I know this and you need to come to me to get it, or I'm going to hide it from you so I can have it for myself. The new world is just, here it all is. And take it with you, with what you want from that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the beauty of the internet and what it's done. I was talking to an ex-client of ours, and also someone that we're working with a little bit now, at dinner on Friday night, and we were just talking about how things have changed, as far as there was such a, importance and focus on education for a long period of life, and that's what everyone's life was about. Educate everyone, educate society, educate as much people as possible.
That was the silver bullet out of poverty and everything.
Yeah,
it kind of is in one way, but not in another.
And we think that's number one up there, and it's so important that you need to get educated. But now with the internet, it's information is so readily available. And what we were talking about, I don't know if this is correct or not, but it was a question getting raised of, is resourcefulness going to become more important moving forward, and focus and those things, because all that information is going to be out there. It's how can you use that information, not how can I learn it, how can I use it?
How can I apply that, which has been the same old trick for a millennia. It's just,
True.
You know what I mean? It's called the internet now, but in the past it was stories.
Yeah.
And before that, after that, it was, written word. This is the thing, nothing has changed in 1,000 years. People are still fundamentally people, and 90% of our brains aren't logical. And that's where all the stuff's happening, and that's going to take a long time for us to genetically or evolve through that for our modern world to actually have the tools that we need to succeed now. And by the time our brains probably get used to it, it'll be 1,000 years past that anyway.
Exactly. So let's add this in. It's not on the board, but another one for wealthy people. They stay in their circle of influence, not their circle of concern.
I love that. That HBO doco on Warren Buffett, he talks about that so much. He has that picture of that baseball dude that I've talked about before.
Yeah.
And he just swings for what he knows. He just lets everything else go that's outside of that. I've been doing just property and nothing else for 10 years. And so often people are like, why aren't I doing shares? Or why don't I start this other business? Or why don't I do that? And it's well, why would I do it? Right now, why would it make sense? A lot of people have opinions, but most of them still haven't done it either.
And don't get this wrong, it's not that and I know you don't find those things not interesting.
I love them.
You'd love to talk about them at any time. It's just it's not a focus right now, because to your plan, to your priorities, you've figured out things that are more important, that need your focus. You don't have unlimited time in the day. You need to find the thing that you want to focus on, whether that's going to be for the rest of your life or not. That's fine, but for right now, stay present, focus on what's important. I feel like that was a good little wrap up of a few of the things that we've talked about.
And the last one, which we won't touch on before we get into the tips and tricks that people are using that are wealthy, which is simple basic stuff, is just, not that we're doing it, because this is unfortunately a one-way conversation. If you guys were sitting here with us having this chat, then you'd find that we'd be asking a lot more questions than we would be talking. That's just the sort of way that it works with us. But wealthy people do listen, and they don't just listen, they ask great questions.
And they're tied into each other as well. It's you can't ask great questions if you're not listening.
Yeah.
You can't direct a conversation properly if you're waiting for your turn to speak. like that's no one's going to listen to you. Like it's like, oh, I can't wait to tell them something about me, and then we'll talk about me for a little while. That ends a conversation.
You know, think about it in your life, right? There's two examples here. One is every single one of us is an expert in something. It might be like raising children, or business, or it could be health, or it could be your job or your profession, or it could be anything else. Like everyone is specialist at something if they're over the age of 30. You know, just the way that society points us in a direction, you sort of focus. And you know, it's like when you're whatever you're really, really good at, or what you understand, you know, when someone else that's just getting into it is in your presence talking about it, you know, my wife and I always laugh, like, how easy it was, like how simple our life was. Little did we know before we had kids, like at the time we were so career focused and so like lifestyle focused that we were just in our bubble. And then looking back, it's like, what the hell did we do for those 140 or 60 hours a week? Like, where was all that free time going? And it was like, and it was just, and it's like when people that don't have children, I've got heaps of mates like this, are always like talking about kids. No, you're not. Like, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just a funny thing. And all the parents out there that are listening to this would be laughing. Like, it's just, it's like when someone talks to you that hasn't had a child about parenting, it's just fucking hilarious. And it's kind of like,
I get what you're saying now, but you're going to say go different. I've never tried to preach about parenting.
And you know, when it's the same when, you know, you're around those people and you're an expert, and it's kind of, you know, when you get in the presence of someone who, or when I do anyway, when I get in the presence of someone that really knows something about a very focused area, particularly if it's something that I'm interested in, I will just hammer them with questions, like to the point where I, you know, like, I'm so, like, I want to know everything, because I'm fascinated about learning, and I'm fascinated about learning that particular thing that they're very good at. Where I find a lot of people will just, you know, like they're in the presence of an expert that has some really valuable information that they could really apply, that would help their life in that area that they're interested in fixing.
Yeah.
And then they just spew at them, like they just talk and talk. And it's just like, how do you learn anything new if you don't, you know, take advantage of those situations? And so a great question, if you're not comfortable with doing that or not used to it, is, you know, if you're in my position, knowing what you know now, like, what would you do differently? That's the first question I ask every single millionaire I meet and every successful investor. Like, another great question is, if you were starting again, what would you do differently? And you can have an hour conversation with someone where they just, you know, it's the reverse, like, and you just learn so much, like stuff that's taken me 10 years or another person I've talked to 30 years to learn, you can learn in like half an hour.
Yeah.
And you can shortcut everything. So wealthy people listen and they ask great questions.
And another thing I was just going to throw onto that is ask weird questions as well.
Yeah, you're the king at the weird questions.
Yeah, like I guess that's a little bit of my thing, and I've developed that because it's just really, like, it just works well. Like, so if someone asks you a question that you haven't been asked before, you're so much more excited to answer that. That alone is usually enough to get a conversation going, let alone the fact that they might have had these, like if they're an expert or someone that knows what they're doing, they might have had this conversation exactly the same way 100 times in a row that week. Who knows? If you can mix it up and make it more personal, more about you, they won't think you're weird. They're going to appreciate you being yourself and giving them something else to work with rather than just following their standard sort of day-to-day routine.
Yeah, so to sort of summarize that, you know, wealthy people are solution-orientated, they prioritize, they manage their time, they are accountable for themselves in their own lives, they are present, they're consistent, they do take advice, but they take it with a grain of salt, and they listen, you know. And the flip side of that is, I suppose, people that are just starting their journeys or that end up broke. You know, if you're just starting your journey, it's the most beautiful place to be. Like, I feel like everything's utopia when you're just getting started, or it was for me. It was so exciting.
Same, and it's like, they seem like every step you take, once that step's taken, they can be hard steps still, but once they're taken, you take such big steps, if that makes sense. Like, they're bigger steps when you get started, and as you go further and further along the journey, unfortunately those steps get smaller and smaller. But unfortunately, it's just what you have to go through, and that is the journey that we're all on. Yeah,
and like in terms of that step, like as you get further down the track, one step might be like 3 years worth of steps in the past.
Yeah.
But because you're mentally ready for it, it just feels like hopping off the gutter. It's a really different experience. So now what I wanted to talk through is something that I read from Robert Kiyosaki the other night when I couldn't sleep. Probably wasn't the best thing to do because I went back to bed and thought about it for an hour.
Yeah, but you're happy doing that now, right?
I was like stoked to just, plan for this podcast, and it's kind of gone a different way. So if you're still listening, this is like really what I wanted to talk about today. And that is, what wealthy people do with their money to become wealthy, if you know what I mean. Like starting from scratch and remembering all that mind stuff, set stuff, like slip straight into this. So how do we work through this?
I don't know. I don't think, like, we've numbered it out, but I don't think it's necessarily an order. It's not a priority. There's not one thing that's more important than the other.
Yeah,
my thoughts.
We'll just sort of start to finish.
Yeah.
Some people work back to front. I understand that as well.
Yeah. So I guess education.
Yeah.
At some point or another, every wealthy person has at least had to become an expert or get educated in one specific field at the very minimum. Like, it might not seem like it with some people, but they will still be very educated in at least one area, right?
Yeah, so I've never met a successful person that's worth over a couple of $1 million that doesn't have one skill set that they leverage to get wealthy.
Yeah.
Now, it could be business, it could be shares, it could be property, it could be crypto, it could be being very, very good at a specific industry in a job. Mm-hmm. Or it could be just really freaking good at one thing. Like, a lot of wealthy people are either good at selling, good at managing people, or good at marketing. And I've found that they are the skill sets that pay the big money. And once you've got a surplus of income, you can reinvest, which we'll talk about later on.
Yeah, definitely.
So what all wealthy people do is they create a foundation of education. And as Ad said, like, this is the hardest and most boring part about becoming wealthy, is you need to focus. Like, there's absolutely no one that I've ever met that's a jack of all trades that's earning more than $100,000 a year. You have to focus, and focus can be extremely boring because getting wealthy is actually just doing the same thing over and over and over again, or being consistent over the long term. And for a lot of people that is, their version of hell. So it's just recognizing that, like, if you really want to get there, it's either a really long-term plan or it's doing the same thing that's working again and again and again. Yeah,
well, like, it's good that you mentioned long-term plan, because that's the next thing we want to talk about, is more so planning. So I'm going to jump a little bit ahead here. I've got a bit of an idea of how this is going to roll back around on itself. So with the planning side of things, so obviously if we're thinking, okay, we want to get educated in a very focused space, you now have a lot of knowledge in this one specific area. What do you want to do with it? Like, sit there and tell your friends about it at the barbecue every single weekend?
You want to apply it.
Exactly. And so the way to apply that is, you can do it from one way, just get out there and start doing it, which I'm a big fan of. Get the ball started, but that's a good way to help build your motivation to keep it going. But you're only going to get so far with that, and you're going to hit a point where you're either overwhelmed or you realize that you need to start planning, and you need to have a plan in place that you can start actioning. So you're not thinking about the bigger picture on a day-to-day basis. You're thinking about achieving specific things which are getting to you to your long-term plan.
100%, man. Like, planning really starts regardless of where you are, with identifying very, very clearly where you are right now and where you loosely want to be in the future. I say loosely because you have no idea how far along this journey you could be in 15 years. It could be half as far as you think you'll be, or it could be 10 times further than you think it would be. Like, I spoke to a guy yesterday earning $200K per year. He's signing up in the next week, and he has a goal of making 50 grand a year within 20 years from today. And I said, if you don't achieve that, we haven't met. Because based on his income potential plus the plan that he will have in place, or the idea that he will have of, execution, it's just a no-brainer if he's disciplined and consistent. So you start with where you are, you get a loose idea of where you want to be. That idea is this simple: whatever your current annual salary is, try and replace it with passive income within 20 years from today. 15 if you're a bit more aggressive.
Yeah.
So once you've got where you are and where you want to be, you have to address what's holding you back. Now, if you're not already financially free, in my mind, there's only two reasons, and this is brutal. One is you're too young and you haven't had enough time, like myself and Ads, to actually do it.
Yeah.
Or you are missing the plan that's actually going to get you there, and therefore you haven't had the right plan in place. So it's not really, I talk to people all the time that are like, Ben, I'm working so hard. Why is this not working? And it's because the plan isn't the right one.
Yeah.
So the plan to go to work and earn 300 grand a year and work 80 hours a week is a good one, but you'll burn out. And if you're not doing something with that 300k, you'll be broke.
Yeah.
And I talk with so many people like that, that are 40, 50 years of age that just focused on career and are still absolutely just getting started now. I know 21-year-olds that own 3 properties, 2 of them outright, that are nurses earning 60k that just had a plan and they worked it.
Yeah. So I guess as like we've talked about education and planning, and that they're a bit more holistic, that link into, I guess, characteristics that we see in wealthy that helps them in all areas of their life. But as we go into the finance and specifically investing, a major part of that plan is obviously budgeting. And so that's really where the next step is. This, I guess, for the plans, like you can have a plan in place, you know what you want to do, the steps to do it. It might be, okay, I need to save what, $20,000 this year. That's the goal I've set myself. I need to do it. How do I do that? It's by a budget or reducing my expenses, unless I can somehow control my income and go and work a lot more. But typically, with everyone being so time poor, like you just touched on, we're working 80 hours a week. It's not as simple as going out and getting another job to get that extra money. So I don't know, what's your thoughts as far as the best way someone can help them move forward towards that budgeting, or how do you see, from talking to so many people that you do, what's the successful way that wealthy people will use their budgeting?
I think the way that I learned from Robert Kiyosaki was you need to identify what the fixed costs in your life are as soon as possible. So let's say you earn $1,000 a week, and you've got $500 a week worth of costs, which, I'm talking about like people with families again, like you're laughing right now. You're like, $1,000 a week, $500 a week worth of costs. I've got this. You know what I mean? Like I add 3 kids into the mix in my life, and all of a sudden it needs to be 120 grand a year just to break even. So different stages of life. Like we both lived off $200 a week at uni. Had a ball.
You know what
I mean? Like living off a bit more than that now, still having a good time. So, you start with whatever the fixed costs in your life are. And then once you've got those fixed costs in place, you look at which of those you can eliminate, because getting rid of costs is the number one thing that gets people ahead.
Yeah.
Or which of those costs you can reduce. Now, a silly example is I just looked at all of the costs in my life again, like I do all the time. And I found I was paying for 3 phones, and a work phone, like a friend's phone, family phone, and my wife's phone. And I realised I was paying $120 a month for all of them, $360 a month. I just realised that Audi has just bought the Telstra network for their provider, and I'm paying between $15 and $35 a month for exactly the same plan I had before. I was with Vodafone and Optus, and now I'm with Telstra, which is a better network maybe. You know what I mean? Maybe. So I've literally saved myself about 60% of my costs in that one line item.
Yeah.
And because I saved that so easy, I was like, well, shit, what else can I save? And I looked at all my fixed costs and ended up reducing my fixed costs by eliminating stuff or just changing stuff by about 35%. Now, 35% of 120 grand a year of fixed costs is a huge saving. That's just surplus money. I wasn't spending it. So it just goes into paying off debt or investing now. Yeah,
and there's no tax coming into that equation either. It's not like...
No.
Yeah, like this is your after tax income, your net income. So think about that as well before you think I just need to go out and get a second job. Have a look at where you're spending your money first and see if there's a simpler way to do it.
Like identifying those fixed costs, then looking at the variable or your lifestyle and going, well, I'm a huge believer in enjoying the whole journey. Like I don't feel like on my journey I've ever sacrificed anything that I wanted to do personally. Like I've still had a sick time doing it. Maybe I wasn't able to do a few little things, but to me, like, the idea of buying a property was a lot more exciting than having dinner 5 times a week instead of 4, which is like literally we used to just go out for dinner all the time on our journey.
Yeah.
Pre-kids. So like variable costs, reduce them as well. Now a lot of people don't look at the biggest cost in their life, which is tax. Adam and I aren't licensed to talk about this in any way, but a good accountant should be able to help you figure out a way to understand the blacks and the whites in the system and use those blacks and whites to your advantage. You know, the amount of money that I've saved from a good accountant compared to clients that I talk to that are in similar positions with bad ones is insane. Like insane amounts of money, the right accountant with the right types of things going on. And I'll just have to leave it at that because we can't talk
go
further.
Too far. It's just, I guess it turns it back around or brings it back around to taking advice from the right people, and I guess finding those right people and who you want to take advice from. To keep moving it forward though, so we're looking purely from an investment or a finance
sorry,
point
can I
of
just
view.
say one more thing there?
Yeah, of course.
Which kind of flicks into the next one. The other thing that all wealthy people do is like they reduce the expenses. Then they do focus on making more money. The reality is the more money you make, the sooner you can get to financial freedom.
Yeah.
So that might be just asking your boss for that raise that you deserve, or taking that one extra client on a month, which is pure profit in your business, or whatever else, working that second job for a period of time.
Be careful here.
Yeah. What do you mean?
I might ask for a bigger cut.
Well, I'm shooting myself in the face here. But, you know, they do focus on income because it's very, you know, income is important, particularly in this world where serviceability is so challenging to access. And then we'll sort of come back in a minute to like some other things that they do. But it's important to recognise that earning more money helps speed this journey up dramatically as well.
Definitely. And I think, I guess I've said a few times, go out and get that second job, but you highlighted a really clear path of how you don't have to put in a lot of extra time. It might be simply just, looking at your superannuation correctly to help secure some future income that you know that if you did that right now, it's going to make that pay dividends in the future by setting that up correctly. Doesn't always mean having to go out and take, like getting another job and doing those extra hours or doing hours of work. It could be just that conversation with the right person, say like your boss or someone that might be able to help put you in a position where you could earn income in a different way, or just make a few changes in your life. But I guess that all links back to being able to save up money to be able to then put into investments, right?
Yeah, and there's 2 ways of savings. There's the hard way, which is budgeting and reducing expenses and then creating a surplus which you invest.
Yep.
Or there's just the easy way, which Robert Kiyosaki sort of showed me, and that was paying yourself first, right? Like
definitely.
it's good to know what your fixed expenses are and, you know, reducing them, but it's much easier to just go, look, for the rest of the year I'm just figuring out a way, I don't even know how, to save $500 a week or $300 a week or $2,000 a week, and just paying yourself first and then figuring out a way to live after that.
Yeah, and so like just to be clear, when we're saying pay yourself first, it's talking it from a sense of you are putting money away for investing or for assets that you will not touch.
Exactly. So
you do not touch ever. It's not an emergency fund. It's not something you can look at for when you need to have a holiday. This is something that's purely for investing and being diligent and not touching that, because it's easy. Like I've seen it with people, and I've given that, not given that advice, but we've talked about this, and they've thought, yep, I can do that. I can start saving. But it seems to be as soon as there's something that comes up that looks really attractive to spend that money on, that's when they really get challenged. It's not so much putting the money aside, it's not spending it at those big times.
You know, this isn't savings money, this isn't rainy day money, this isn't expenses money, it's not lifestyle money. This is purely like the way I used to set it up with my bank was I had this account which I could transfer to, but I couldn't transfer out of without physically walking into the bank. And for anyone that's been in a bank in the last 20 years, it's a absolute punish going in there. You know what I mean? Like that is probably the worst service model in the world right now. And
And they're disappearing too.
Yeah,
like,
and
the one down the road from me is gone now. So
the one actually I tried to drive to yesterday, ANZ shut.
yeah,
I had to drive somewhere else to go put some money in the bank.
Yeah, and that's a major lender, so it's obviously like things are going more online. So make it hard for yourself not to follow your plan.
But you know, they save money, and then once they're in a position where they've got a healthy savings buffer for a rainy day, because it's important to manage the downside. If you lose a job, if you've got a couple of hard years or 5 hard years, like there are things called recessions and depressions like that do come, and you know, as good as things are right now, they might not always be that good. Like some years you lose tenants, some years property prices decline, some years you've got to sell something before you wanted to. Plan for the worst, and a good buffer helps with that. But after you've got your buffer in place, like, you know, a lot of these wealthy people, you know, look to create a surplus. So post savings, we'll just say one more thing before we get into like where you can put money, and that's just delaying your gratification.
Yep. So it's like you can go out and you can buy, say you've saved up $20,000, and it's like I touched on with just before, that you could go out with that $20,000 and let's say buy a jet ski. Fantastic.
Pretty sick jet ski for 20k.
Could be really fun. Could take 4-seater, take your whole family out on it. Who knows? Like, it could be something you really want right now, something that you could have right now by spending your savings. But delaying gratification links really closely in with investing, and we'll go into that with a bit more detail now. But it's pushing that back. So you purchase the asset, which is going to increase in value and give you some income first, and then use the money you make from your investments to go out and get the jet ski. So you're not there working for every single one of your toys. It's like a bonus that you get when you're happy with the position that you're in financially.
For sure. Like, I love that. And I've always been really good at delaying gratification. It helps when you're not hugely materially orientated. Is that the right way to say that? Like,
or materialistic.
Yeah, like I enjoy having a nice home. I enjoy having like my $15 AS shirt, which I just love. Like, I enjoy good quality lifestyle, but I'm not chasing cars, I'm not chasing expensive holidays, and I'm certainly not living something for someone else. Like, my fun is like so simple, like so basic, and it doesn't cost much to live it. And so I'm really grateful that, because that hasn't always been a priority for me, or a hole that I've needed to fill, it's been much easier to delay gratification. And certain cities in Australia make it more difficult than others to do that. Like,
that's a really good point.
You know, it's quite easy in Queensland to be like that as someone that grew up in Sydney, because even if you're just wearing bummy clothes, you still look fresher than 90% of people up here. But the reality is, in Sydney, like, it's such a competitive world where, like, you know, guys earning 50k driving Beamers to show everyone that they're crushing it. And it's kind of just, you can easily get sucked into that if you're not prepared to delay your gratification. And the best way to delay gratification is to go back to your plan. And the clearer you know what you want and why you want it, and that's dragging you through that stuff, the more you can just slide the things that don't matter.
Yeah.
Or maybe they do matter, but just pay for them using someone else's money. You know what I mean?
It makes more sense that way. But like, and we understand that, like Ben was saying, it's like, yeah, we might not be overly materialistically driven, but there is still things that we want, and there is still things that we're not prepared to sacrifice. So like you said, you still want to like have a good lifestyle, and that might mean an overseas holiday or a trip once a year that we refuse to sacrifice, and it has to be a part of our life. And that's just simply, once you recognize that these are things that you won't sacrifice, that prioritization comes into play. And it's like, okay, now I budget for this, and I plan ahead of time that I need that, or I want that one trip each year. I know that's going to cost me $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, who knows, but you then work it backwards, reverse engineer it, and include that in your budget as well.
Delaying gratification on the big liabilities, like big expensive cars with car loans, big expensive credit cards with massive credit card debt or personal loans, as well as really big expensive houses that you're paying a fortune on interest for that are actually declining in value right now, are the things that crush where you end up.
Exactly.
So I know people that we've talked to, and you know, we talk to 500 or 600 people a year, and I know people that have gone and bought $1 million property, and that is so cool, like so stoked for them that they're achieving that. But the reality is that has locked them into, based on their income, 30 years just to get rid of the debt on their home.
Yep.
And then investing on top of that, which would take them another 15 to 20 years. So it's locked them into 50 more years of work. Where for me, for example, I invested based on my plan at the time, which was, so had so many holes in it when I was getting started compared to now. Like, I had no idea what I was doing, but I thought I did. And my first home was $310,000. Like, I started where I could start.
Yep.
And I've slowly over time, increased my position on my own home from selling other homes to get to where I wanted to be. But I only did it at a time where I knew I'd be comfortable taking on the debt. And the home that I bought is no different from the home that I paid $310 for based on my current position. So it's relative. Like, if you can delay your gratification, I promise you can have every single thing you want in your life, but maybe not all at the same time, and maybe not right away.
Yeah. And I guess that takes into not getting too far ahead of yourself, right? Like,
just enjoying the journey. Hey?
Yeah, like I know we all want that, like the awesome massive house right on the beach or wherever resonates with you. That's me personally. I'd love to be right on the water, and there's a way I could make that happen today if I wanted to do it. But it's also going to mean that I'm committing to working big hours for the next 30 years of my life minimum, just to facilitate that. And I don't know, like, I've talked about it with my partner, and it's just not something we wanted to do, and we had to make a decision to put that off, to focus on these other things first, knowing that down the track we will be able to do that, and we'll be able to do that comfortably. It just might be in 15 or 20 years time, which is fine, because that's better than having it right now but working or having a life that I don't feel happy with for the next 30 years guaranteed.
Yeah, and like, the way that I was able to buy the home that I wanted was I literally sold 4 investment properties to raise a bunch of cash. And I know, as an investor and as a person whose brain works like a compound interest calculator, only because I've spent so many nights sitting there looking at it, that it's going to cost me a lot in terms of future gains by selling those properties. Like, I completely understand that, but I'm not a guy that likes huge risk, or debt, especially on an asset that I can't write off from a tax perspective, that doesn't have any advantages in the system that we currently operate in.
Yep.
And so I sold those properties, raised some cash, and it enabled me to dramatically speed up the process of acquiring that property to the level that I felt comfortable with. So there's lots of different ways to get what you want. And when I was buying those properties, I wasn't buying them to be like, hey, I'm going to sell them all and pay off this home.
No.
I just was buying, what was some good, some okay assets that, when I bought at the right times and things like that, ended up doing okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really want people to know that, like, for me, the journey is, the adventure, like the destination, having achieved so many destinations now, same as you. They're never what you expect them to be. They never make you as happy as you think they will.
No.
And, you may as well just enjoy this 15-year journey to financial freedom, or 20 years, because the time's going to pass anyway. Like, it's not going to make you any happier the day you pay off your own home, or, take away all that fear that you currently feel. If you're a fearful person and telling stories around fear, then the fear of not owning your own home will just be replaced with another one. You know what I mean? It's just the way that your mind works.
Or your circle changes, and you might be around people that say live in that same neighbourhood as you now, in that same area, and they've all got the same house, and you dream of the bigger house down the road, or
it's a never-ending,
the next more expensive area, right?
Yeah, I've done that too. So, like, the last thing we want to talk about, I suppose, is investing. And again, we're not financial advisors. We're just licensed real estate agents that can talk about property. But investing is sort of broken up into 3 parts, really.
Yeah, I'd say 3 parts.
You touch on the first one.
So, like, we've already touched on it a little bit, and it was, you can spend your investment income once it becomes positive cash flow for you. So once your asset is bringing in money to you each and every week, that's money that you can choose to do what you want with it, whether that's paying down your home loan, whether that's reinvesting it into the asset to pay it off quicker, or if that's reinvesting into new assets. There's a few different options out there, but the one I want to touch on first is just spending it. So it's like you said before, spend someone else's money. Like, if you can go out there and purchase a great property, set it up in a way that's going to bring you cash flow from day one coming into your bank account, that's excess money that you can then start spending straight away, all because you've gone through that first process of budgeting and saving and investing that money in a smart way.
And I love that. Like, imagine you got out of bed tomorrow and you'd achieve baseline financial freedom, which is effectively where all of those fixed costs in your life that we talked about a moment ago are covered. So there's no more phone bills, there's no more petrol, there's no more regos, there's no more insurances, there's no more kids school fees, there's no more whatever, interest, rent, like all of those fixed expenses in your life that, you know, suck up so much of your income are just gone, because the passive income from whichever asset class you've decided to target, business, property, shares, etc., is now covering that.
Yeah.
And that is a huge weight off your shoulders, I think.
Yeah.
And that is sort of the first point. Like, I call that financial freedom, effectively, where your baseline costs plus your lifestyle costs are kind of covered.
Yeah.
And that means that you now have choices in your life to do slightly different things.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to earn as much, you don't have to work as much, you can drop your kids at school, you can change the structure of your week, travel more, or you can just work your ass off and go to the next level, like once all of that stuff is covered, which is, I suppose, wealth.
Yeah.
And that is where you actively create more than you need passively, so that you can have the life that you currently have, plus significantly more choices in the future.
Correct. And so, like, I guess to just make that a little bit clearer, so we've got the one is spend that investment income on something that you would like yourself.
Yeah.
2 is put that investment income towards covering your fixed costs in your life.
Yeah.
Or 3, put that income towards further creation of wealth or wealth creation strategies. So one thing I want to do with that is we've kind of laid out a number of things you can do. So you get educated in a focused area, you plan, you then set up your finances to be able to achieve and focus out, or like follow through with that plan. So you budget or reduce expenses or whatever else. You then save to get up your initial deposit to get into it, or your initial cost to start up a business or whatever investment you wanted to go down the track of doing. You then delay the gratification. So it's not, I'm a hero, I just bought an investment property, or I'm a hero, I just started my own business. It's work your ass off and be clear about what the long-term picture is, and then you invest. So like, we're talking about reinvesting that income into a wealth creation strategy. You can just rinse and repeat this process. So not that it's something that we've done ourselves, we prefer to focus on property with that, but like, you can go down that path with property, and if you get to a point where you then want to move on to something else, like, there's nothing saying that you have to stay focused on property your whole entire rest of your life. We're talking about setting something up now which is a long-term asset to help with your long-term financial position. Once it's set up, next step, like repeat the process or whatever else.
Yeah, like, you may continue to do more property, you may just exit completely out of the workforce and do whatever it is that your life is calling you to do, or you might just go sit on a beach for a while. Like, there's so many choices that come with not worrying about money in the way that we all currently do now, that have liberated my life and enabled me, you know, to just think about things completely differently. You know what I mean?
And as someone that's like not as far through the journey as Ben and is still in that accumulation phase, I still feel like so much more content having that plan in place, knowing that I'm achieving my goals or like the steps I need to take with minimum effort, because I'm setting up a really good plan from the get-go to be able to do so without forcing myself and stressing out about it and making everything so hard. Because I'm not saying it has to happen this year. I'm not saying it has to happen in 5 years. I'm realistic that at the moment it's going to happen in 20 years. And once I get through this part, if I can take the next step, I might be able to bring that down to 15 years, to 10 years. But it's just the confidence that you can have from knowing that you have that security in the future by simply continuing to do something that you're happy to do right now.
Yeah, and I love this. Like, Ryan from On Property, who's a good friend of both of ours, sort of says that once you go through the accumulation phase, and you've got the assets providing you with the income that you'll need in the future to be financially free, then you can start at that phase making very, very different choices. So you don't have to wait 15 or 20 years, although you can if you're enjoying what you're doing already. Like, a lot of people just already, you know, get all this stuff and they're enjoying what they're doing. There's other people that hate it and are looking for a way out.
Yeah.
And Ryan says, if that's you, if you're in the hate it category and looking for the way out, you set up the assets, businesses, shares, property, whatever it is for you, that will enable you to get the income in the future that you need to be financially free. And once it's set up and it's producing a passive income stream, and there's effectively no pressure for you to leave your job that's paying you and your partner 200 grand a year combined, or 100 grand a year combined, that's causing all this stress in your life, go down to a job if you're on 200k that's paying you 130 grand a year, where the expectation isn't you have to give a pint of blood every time you walk past the door in the morning. Cut your hours back, you and your partner, and go to 3 days a week each. And yes, your income's going to dramatically reduce, but in the future you're going to be in a position where, like, today you're making choices, and in the future just principal and interest repayments over 25 years are going to get you there as well. And what I've found is that people that follow their passion, as well as their strengths, as well as an actual realist, and realize that, I'm passionate about helping people, but that passion in terms of a dollar figure for market valuation on that passion is significantly lower than the value that I can add now, and still have that fulfillment thing in terms of helping people, but also make money from doing it. So you've got to be real as well. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
There's a realistic approach to all of this stuff too. You can live in the clouds, but the reality is, markets value certain things differently, and certain skill sets are always going to enable you to get forward faster.
Definitely, and I guess you can build those skill sets, but what we're talking about here is that freedom and getting to that place where you have the choice, you have the time to develop those skill sets, to focus on them, and to, I guess, take them wherever you personally want to go. That's not something we can decide for you. And we talk a lot about financial freedom and property as something that's very important for us, and it's a priority, but that's completely cool if it's not a priority for you. We're just bringing it up so you're aware that maybe it could be, and maybe it might actually help you be able to focus on your other priorities more if you just address this one first.
I'm going to sort of say that a little bit less eloquently, because I completely agree that financial freedom isn't everyone's priority, and that's super clear in the results financially in a lot of people's lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
you can see that it's not a priority for 85 to 90% of Australians. Without being an asshole, I'm
not judging him for that at all, and I'm sure you aren't either. It's that's just their choice.
It's just, life is a series of decisions, and what I will say though, that I just think a little bit differently, is if it's not a priority for you right now, it should be.
Yeah.
Because what is important to you and all of us is choices. We all want to spend more time with our families. We all want to look after ourselves better. We all want people around us in our lives that are like-minded, that care for us, that we can grow with. We all want a better future than our past. We all want to leave a legacy in one way or another, whether it's through character and being a beautiful person your whole life and helping people, or through leaving money, or through passing on a property or two to your kids to get them a better start in life. It's universal having choices, and I truly believe, and this is the core tenet of our business to me, is if people are financially free and do prioritize it for a short period of time, then they get choices in their future. So if you're a 20-year-old guy right now and you start thinking about this stuff 20 years before everyone else, by the time you're 40 you'll be financially free, and then between the ages of 40 and 80 or 100 you can do whatever the hell you want to do. When people get to choose what they do, they generally do really positive stuff for society or other people. And I believe that if you're getting started at 40 and by 55 you've got a plan in place to be financially free, you're out of the workforce in terms of needing to earn an income 15 years before everyone else you know.
Yeah.
And you spend those years where you've built these beautiful skills to go and help other people, or start that business that isn't being delivered in the way that you want to. And I truly believe that if people prioritize financial freedom, the world would honestly be a way better place. Because I know for me, I was a much worse person when I had to think about every single dollar that I made versus the person that I am now. I wish I could say my journey was just enlightened, but it fucking wasn't. I worked really hard, I burnt some bridges, I hustled, like I grinded, I gave myself and a lot of other people around me anxiety. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't the best version of myself, and I'm still not. Like hopefully, like that'll just be a lifelong goal, like for all people to become a little bit better every day. But
exactly,
I like who I am a lot more now than I did, because I don't have to make decisions based on fear or greed or deception now.
Yeah.
Like you sometimes, unfortunately, you have to play a game sometimes when you need a job. And it's not the game that you want to play.
No.
It's not the game your boss wants to play either. You're both just caught in a shitty situation most of the time.
Yeah, and it might not even be that. It might be just saying, like as simple as saying you're happy to do something you're not happy to do. If that makes sense. Like, I'm not saying it has to be anything deceiving. It's like
me asking ads to be on this podcast today. It's like, man,
it's like you got to be in front of camera and be on audio. Like it's not something that I walked into this business being like, yeah, I want to do that. That's something I'm excited to do. But it's also like, I'm not going to lie to you and be like, yeah, I love it. Like, I'm going to do this if I actually didn't enjoy doing it. And like the first time was scary as all hell, but afterwards it was like, give me more. I want to do it again. I want to like, it's just fun. It's a cool thing to do, and it's a nice little break up for my work. So it's something that I appreciate now. But it was such a scary thing that I never would have put my hand up to do if you asked me. I would have told you no.
One thing I want to finish on, you know, for those of you still listening or coming back to this and finishing off this, like, you know, ads is getting started and I'm, you know, getting started in a different way in both of our journeys. But why don't you give people your plan for the next, you know, let's call it 15 years, like just loosely. And I'll share mine with people as well. So regardless of where you're starting out, this isn't a theoretical conversation. You actually know what we're doing based on what we know. Take it with a grain of salt. It's not relevant to your situation or advice in any way. It's just, this is what I'm doing type thing.
Yeah, so at the moment, my next step is I'm hoping to start building another property nearby. Hopefully this year, the goal is at the moment, and everything's tracking along that way that should be able to be achieved, which is exciting. So once that property is finished, I will move into it for 12-month period. And then the plan is to then move out of that property. Don't know where yet for that one. Like I'll make that decision afterwards, but that next step will be my own principal place of residence, and I want to do a renovation for that one just because I'm excited to. I've done this.
Say that again. So you've got a property now, it's your PPR. You're going to buy another PPR, turn that into an investment, or you're going to sell that.
The plan is to turn. I guess build another property, move into that one as my new PPR.
Okay, cool.
Existing property now, it was built as an investment property and that was the focus, but just there's certain advantages to moving in as a PPR. Talk to your mortgage broker or tax agent about that one. But so I moved into that property just for 12 months. I'll hold on to that as an investment property, or make a choice at that point in time once the new build's ready, whether or not it's best for me to sell that and to move that money into a better performing asset if I feel that there is a better opportunity out there. So I'm going to reassess that at that point in time. So
you'll build your second property, move into that one, and then you're saying after that, then you'll look at something different, which might be more of the renovator.
Yeah, well, like that's for an investment property. So the next one will be PPR. This one at the moment, I've built as a long-term investment, and I chose very specific location and was very precise about how I wanted it to be because I was planning to hold on to it for 30 years. Now, I don't know if I'm going to do that. Like, that's what I'm saying just there. Like, I might make a choice to sell that and decide to purchase an investment property in a different area because I also wanted to be able to live in the property. So there was some things that I think I might be potentially losing out some potential capital growth, that if I moved it into a different area, that it may be able to do a bit better there. That's something that I'm going to weigh up at that point in time. There's no point in me making a decision now where that's still 6 to 12 months out, depending on how long this next build takes.
I love that, because that's another thing that wealthy people do. They don't waste any emotional energy or time thinking about things that they don't need to think about right now.
No.
What's the point of stressing on something or going back and forth on an idea for years, just in a loop on your head to just stimulate your own mind?
Yeah. When
the time comes and you need to make a decision, then, we'll sit down, of course, like we always do for each other's properties, and just review them and be like, here's 10 different ways to get to where you want to go to. What's the path of least resistance?
Exactly. It's like, okay, here's the transaction cost to move that asset. Is that worthwhile or is it not worthwhile? And we'll make a call at that point in time. But I guess it's more so for me, I'm doing those activities because I know that's a way for me to create extra income for myself. So it's like, it's not going out and getting another job. It's about choosing very carefully where I want to live personally and thinking about them as long-term investments and how I can use that to help filter back into my long-term wealth.
Cool. So your 12-month plan is effectively to buy another property or build it, and then probably rent out what you've got now, give or take. And then what happens after that?
So this won't be too. I'm only planning to stay in that property for the 12 months. That next build, and then the next step is to purchase something, prefer in an area where I can add some solid value to that property by renovating. Okay. So that's my focus there. In between there, I will also add another investment property. At the moment, from my forecasting and numbers, I'm projecting that I'll be able to add another investment property into that mix. So I'll basically be in a position where in about 18 months or so a little bit further, I'll be in a new PPR that I'll want to renovate and be holding on to 2 investment properties.
Cool. And how does all of that play into your long-term vision for your future? Like, how do you go, okay, I've got these 3 properties, what does that give to you and Beck in 15 years' time?
So it just gives us comfort that we know that those properties are getting paid off. So it might be 15 years if we can do certain strategies to speed it up. But at the worst case scenario, we know that with our repayments, with the way we've got it set up, over 25 years, we're comfortable that we're going to own 2 properties that are going to be drawing us in a passive cash flow.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so what is the future income goal or projection based on that strategy? At
the moment, we're aiming to produce $80,000 of income for the both of us.
Yeah.
We don't have children at this point in time, so I don't. That's probably that needs to get reassessed in the future. But for at the moment, we just thought with $80,000 and the reduced expenses that would come from being in that position as well, say if we're not forcing to try and save for the next investment property, we'd be more than comfortable with that. Cool. Whereas then we would start looking at it as, okay, we've got that passive income, we've got that financial freedom, let's go to work to go and develop new wealth creation strategies, or to find new ones that we want to employ, or to purchase more property and to renovate. Like my partner loves all the renovation shows and she really enjoys doing that. So more than happy to keep following her through with that journey for as long as she'd like to keep doing it.
Yeah, and I know, your passion is different than mine, but similar. Like, you're using property, I suppose, as an insurance policy because it's simple. Like for you?
I spend a lot of time playing around, and I'm not going to get into this, but like with shares, trading currency, Forex, managed to stay away from cryptocurrency, thankfully, but basically have tried everything and anything just because I enjoy it, like just pure enjoyment. And after going through all these different things, it was just clear to me that property as a long-term asset just made the most sense for future security, to be honest. Yeah. And that's all I wanted at that. I wanted to nail security down, or that financial security, and then start looking at other things to try and speed up the journey or just enjoy the journey.
The reason why I said that is because people aren't one-dimensional. Like, just because you've got a plan in place now and I've got a plan and it's property orientated because that's the one that's sticking for us at the moment.
Yeah.
And same with you guys, like, properties are focused now, but that doesn't mean in the future you can't change roles, re-educate yourself, change industries, change jobs, start a business, get into shares, Forex, crypto, businesses. Like, there's so much time. Like, I was watching this epic little doco recently, and they asked these guys that have been in like one of the biggest surfing documentaries 20 years ago, what would they say to themselves now? And 3 out of the 7 dudes said, I would tell myself there's way more time than you think.
Yeah.
So just enjoy the journey, because humans aren't one-dimensional. Like, humans like learning, and when you get to a point where your learning's capped, you either sit there, which is unfortunately what a lot of people do, or you continue to learn and grow. And so, I get excited, even though I know nothing about it, about share trading in the future. Like, I feel like I have the personality type to, over a long period of time, 10 years, really figure that out as well. But right now, it is not even on my radar. It's just like, oh, that's a cool, nice idea for my future self, maybe. Right now, I'm just really interested in, same as Adam, like getting a baseline of level financial freedom sorted, doing business that I enjoy, which can also be really profitable if you don't cap the clients like we do each month. And just having a good life as I go through this journey, like trying to balance it out a little bit better.
Definitely. And I don't know, like to me, it's like we keep drawing back to the education. It's come up a lot through this. Like I really enjoy educating myself or just learning and going through that process. So like, I don't know, to draw back to another one as well earlier on, and it was just talking about focused education that we stepped on. And so like you might have realized then I've tried all these different things and I've gone around, but trying all these things didn't help me get to where I wanted to do, but it did make me realize that I needed to be more focused.
Well, that's what we talked about before, right? Sorry to interrupt there, but
fine.
Right education, like right mindset, wrong plan. Like, I mean, but not the wrong plan, just the wrong plan for that particular time in your life, because the successful share traders trade.
Yeah.
Like they can't, it's not a part-time gig for most people that actually become millionaires from it. It's a full-time thing.
But the mindset was off for me personally. It was literally like, I can learn everything.
Okay, yeah.
So sorry, I should have started with that. It was like, I was going in with this idea that like, yep, I'll learn this, now that, tick it off the box, move on to the next one, learn that, now that, tick it off the box, learn the next one. And it was working quite well until a downturn happened. And then it's like, okay, things aren't quite as simple as what 21-year-old Adam thought they were.
That's so good, and like that is such a difference between like the novice and the professional. Hey,
yeah,
you know, like the novice knows everything, and now I know that I don't know anything. There's just a few things that have worked in the past that only work until they don't work anymore.
Yeah,
and so we both understand that now. Like, you know, you're always looking for a linear way to approach things or figure things out, but the reality of markets and the global cycle is it's more like that. Like, as we're seeing in Sydney now, the worst market that we've seen in 30 years, the worst annual decline, I think, in 30 years. You know, like it's a scary time for people that don't understand what's going on, but that's because a lot of those people have like a recency bias where they think that just because it went up, it will continue to do it.
Yeah.
Then you understand that. It's like, no, man, the markets go up and down and people get burnt. And then people buy at the bottom and they do very well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's no one has a crystal ball, like we've touched on a million times. You can't predict this stuff, but it's just being aware that it does happen and planning accordingly. So you know that, yeah, you're not selling yourself down the garden path by going overextending or investing too hard in something that you don't feel comfortable doing.
A big thing that's changed in my strategy since I started till now is I think always 15 to 30 years in the future. So when I'm buying an asset, I'm trying to time it as best as I can without knowing what the hell is going on. Like, I'm not sitting in the Central Bank of America having conversations about how they're going to manipulate the dollar and kick the can down the road a bit further until it doesn't work anymore. Like, I'm not sitting there with the government going, you know, like, we're going to tighten lending to the point where it crashes the Australian market, and then we're going to do a banking commission at the same time, which means we can't actually reverse what we set in motion 2 years before. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not privy to what's going on. But
and here's just, can I just throw something really quickly? I'm reading a book by Peter Lynch at the moment.
Oh, sick. Which one?
I think Beat the Street.
Cool.
So he talked about how himself and a bunch of like really high performing fund managers, or like the best basically Wall Street has, would get together once a year and it would be filmed, I believe, or recorded and put into a magazine. It sounded awesome. It'd been great to just be a fly on the wall in that room. But the thing that he highlighted through telling this story was that all those guys in there, not one of them would agree, for one. These are all the smartest experts you can find, and none of them agree about what's going to happen next. Not one of them. So, and the success rate of them getting it right was horrible moving forward. And it's not having a dig at them as fund managers, or anything like that. There was economists in the room, like they were really esteemed people. It's just, it's a chaotic system. Like you can't pick a couple of indicators and go, oh, I figured it out. this is what things are going to do moving forward. You can just make the best choices you possibly can, and being aware that these things can happen and planning accordingly.
Like Harry Dent was saying exactly that yesterday. He's like, the way that governments and central bankers want the economy to work is just consistent, regular growth forever.
Yeah.
The way that the markets actually work, which everyone seems to have forgotten, is they go up and down, and people are people. And for anyone that, I wasn't involved in crypto in 2018, but for anyone that saw it, basically what happened is prices went from $3,000 to 26 grand in a year.
Yeah.
And then, you know, effectively back down to 7K again, or 3 grand. Like they just, and what we saw, like, you know, as an observer outside the market with no emotional attachment, but with friends that were right in it, is like a full economic cycle top to bottom in 1 year. Like you normally take 7 or 10 years to see that in the stock market, and 7 to 20 years to see it in a property market globally. And what we got to see is like decisions once there's a run are no longer logical. It's a fear of missing out that actually drives the market. Then it's greed, and then that greed sends the market over the top and it comes right down. It's the exact same thing that's happening in Sydney and Melbourne right now. Outside of money being hard, an election year, and sentiment being like at its lowest point since the GFC, and the fact that Australian property prices in Sydney and Melbourne were overvalued according to global standards because we let a lot of people from around the world speculate on our market to prop it up, is that people in 2016 and 17 in Melbourne and 2016 in Sydney were going to open homes on the weekends with somewhere between 20 and 70 groups, and someone in that group was paying between $60,000 and $200,000 more for that property than it was actually worth, because they were suffering from what's called the fear of missing out, as we all know, FOMO, and investor bias, that the market's going to continue to form the way that it does, and investment bias, which is the most dangerous for a property investor, and that's fatigue.
Yeah.
I've gone to open homes with my family every single week for 6 months, and I'm so over it. I just have to buy something. And those three things are what cause the markets in Sydney and Melbourne to be overvalued by what I've been saying for 2.5, 3 years on video, and that is they will see a top to bottom decline of at least 25% in Sydney and 15% in Melbourne, looking more like 20%. And it is not that anything else needed to happen except some people that bought at the top, and I'm sorry if you're one of those listening right now, you know, because the reality of these numbers is there's people that are losing out only if they're selling now. Like if they're holding it for the next 15 to 30 years, Sydney and Melbourne, I can promise you, will be fine. It's just right now it's hard, and what's happening is just a natural recorrection to take off the top or the speculation of that market. Now, Phil Anderson yesterday said that, you know, things could be a little bit more difficult before they get better. Harry Dent said that it could be the worst marketplace, you know, that we go into of all time. You know, everyone's got an opinion, like Ad said before with the Peter Lynch story. You know, I don't necessarily have one. I think a market that rises in value consistently is a dangerous one, and I like to see prices declining a bit, you know, particularly because I wasn't exposed to those markets, because I was selling out in 16, 17, not buying in.
Yeah.
So, you know, all of these things are lessons that you can learn. I don't know, like...
Yeah, like I just think, don't get... This is actually like in that Beat the Street by Peter Lynch, this is a message that he talks about, and it doesn't have to be revolving around shares, because he's talking more so as long-term investing for wealth creation when he was talking about this, and it's consistency. It's like if you consistently invest in something over a long time, you're going to have the results. If you then try and sit there and try and time every peak, every fall, every single little thing, it gets very hard to do. So not to say that there's not definite benefit into not timing the wrong time, but get your head around the fact that there is no perfect time to buy.
Oh, there's no perfect time.
There might be a wrong time, it's like, but that's only if you're overpaying. That makes sense? Like, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, the wrong times are what they call the winner's curse phase, which was probably 16 to 17 in Sydney and Melbourne, where people are consciously overpaying, you know, but they're not getting exposed to this sort of stuff like that you guys are, or following Phil's stuff, or following Peter's stuff, or Ray Dalio or Warren Buffett. Like these guys almost every single week are putting out a press release or commenting on the marketplace. you don't have to be as good as those guys, but taking into account what they're saying. Like when Peter Lynch came out last year and said that he believes that the stock market's pretty well priced in America right now. Like pretty well priced in as meaning that like it's really overpriced without like saying it. You sort of got to listen. Like when the most successful investor or like hedge fund of all time is coming out publicly and saying, hey, like, are they doing it so that the market corrects so they can buy it? Which sort of happened immediately after he did it by 15%.
It makes you wonder.
Or is he just trying to protect people because he's got so much money that he's actually genuinely trying to help now? So,
like, the market will sometimes, it could be that, but like the market will get overcooked, and it's like that might have been the trigger. Like he might have been the trigger saying that. Doesn't mean he was the reason for it turning around.
Of course not.
That makes sense.
Like, doesn't have that much power.
Nah, it's just overpriced. People are already got that like fear there. They're scared. They're worried, and they're going, yeah, okay. That's the trigger for enough 15%, a proportion to go, we're out.
Yeah, and what I like about the strategy that I've built for myself for my portfolio is I try and do my best to understand long-term, big picture global timing, which you can learn about from Fred Harrison and Phil Anderson, or Australian timing. So I listen to what CoreLogic and HTW are saying, and when CoreLogic says to me at the moment that Brisbane is cheaper to buy than it was in 2008, I go, well, yes, Australia could be going through another hard year or hard couple of years depending on who gets elected this week, but Brisbane is still cheaper than it was 11 years ago right now when you factor in inflation. So if Sydney and Melbourne are overcooked and everyone says that Australia is overcooked just because of those two markets, I'm hedging my bets by looking at, the long-term performance of Brisbane over 46 years according to Homely being comparable to Sydney and Melbourne, but the short-term performance being significantly under it. I'm kind of... And then when I buy Brisbane, I don't expect anything out of it ever.
No.
But I have a thought process that as people earn more money and more people move here and more infrastructure goes in and the population grows to the size of Sydney and Melbourne, that it will probably be worth, based on the history of the world, a little bit more in the future than it is now. But my strategy is to try and get timing semi-right, to mainly just not buy at the wrong time.
Exactly.
And then I overlay properties with long-term potential for growth and I don't expect anything in the short term. And then I try and buy properties with great cash flow now. So that's why I like Brisbane, because you can do houses and granny flats, or you can buy land and build dual income and get the type of cash flow that people can only dream of in Sydney and Melbourne, which means it's a cash flow play for me because I truly just want to own these assets outright for the cash flow.
Yeah. And
maybe it's not the easiest way to get that cash flow, but for me, based on my low risk profile, it is a consistent way. Two incomes, one property that the average mum and dad in an area can afford. I feel comfortable with that. And then overlaying on top of that, properties that I might be able to add a little bit of value to in the future because they're not perfect right now.
Yeah.
It starts to become, and then looking at houses rather than units and closer to the city rather than further away, or walking distance to the beach rather than the suburb a bit further away.
Yeah.
Like all of these little things become part of like a strategy or a scenario that I just don't care what's happening in the wider world because I'm not playing the same game. I'm not playing the boom and bust speculative game anymore.
Yeah. I'm
still involved in their game, and when all of the world's property prices go down by 40% once every 20 years, I have to ride that down. That sucks, you know what I mean? But because I'm living off the cash flow and because I'm not overextending myself, I do sleep better, and these dips in markets become a huge buying opportunity as well if you know what you're doing. And worst case scenario, the market just goes into free fall. At the bottom of all that, there's going to be some incredible buyers if you've just got savings in the bank or equity in your home now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm not hedging my bets that that's going to happen, and if it does, you respond to it.
And it's just a really good point that it's like everyone thought Australian property was doing so well a couple of years ago, when in fact, like, a couple of markets were doing so well. Like, Australia's full of different markets within a market. Like, I'm sure you would have heard that enough times now that you'd start to realise that that's the case. So it's like when we talk about, like there might be a buying opportunity after a correction, that's the case, but it's not always the case. If you had a board in Brisbane right after the Australian correction, you would have sat relatively fat for 10 years waiting till now, being like, oh no, it's going to start to move soon, right? So it's not always like, but I still don't think that would have been a bad purchase, because you didn't immediately lose the value on your home or buy in the winner's curse, or that exact little timing that could have really hurt you in the short term. But like you said, still long term, even if you did buy in that worst possible part, you're still going to work out okay in the end, as long as you didn't overextend yourself to make that purchase.
I love that, because Australia is not Sydney and Melbourne or Brisbane and Perth. It's a series of markets that just operate in completely different cycles. So since the last GFC, which apparently was the second worst globally since the Great Depression, you know, Melbourne prices have gone up 60 to 70%. Sydney prices have gone up 70 to 100%. Some suburbs in both those markets have gone up by 50, others have gone up by 200. Then you've got Perth that's gone down by, 20%, 25%. Darwin that's gone down from the top to now by 25, almost 30%. You've got Brisbane that's sat completely flat. Like, it's just, I can understand why people think it's complicated. Like, and I don't want to make this more complicated than it has to be, but there are also things like the reason Brisbane has sat flat for 11 years, like there's a number of them, but one of them is that if you look at the 3 years before that 11, it went up by 80% in 3 years. So you got 10 years worth of growth in 3. If you look at Sydney in the 9 years before 2012, it went up by less than 1% per annum, which meant incomes had increased, confidence had come back into the market, prices were now affordable again, and it enabled, because it was affordable, because for 9 years people had done nothing but save money, and because we let the international floodgates open, and because money was cheap, and it was after a recession, like a financial crisis, the government was pumping money back into property at that time, things went off. And, and same in Melbourne, and everyone likes a winner, so everyone gets on. But if you look at the last 3 cycles, Sydney and Melbourne, from what I've seen, seem to perform a little bit better out of a GFC. And then in the second half of the cycle, according to Phil Henderson, what I've noticed is that like a Brisbane, a Perth, a Canberra, and Adelaide seems to do better based on history. History doesn't always repeat, but it's interesting to look at these things objectively, because I was an all-in Sydney investor. Like if I could just buy Sydney at the right price, that would be what I'd do, because that's where I grew up and that's what I like. Like a lot of other Australians, I've had to figure out something else. Like, do I like Brisbane more than Sydney? No. Do I like making money more than losing it? Hell yeah. You know what I mean? And while I can make great cash flow and set up this foundation in Brisbane with an intention to get long-term growth, I'll do it. But, give me the opportunity to buy Sydney at 60 cents in the dollar. I'm taking it. You know what I mean? Like, because
100%.
And this is the thing. Like, you just got to ebb and flow. Your strategy has to change. You have to evolve and learn and grow, like all these things we've talked about at the start of the podcast. Because without it, I'd still be buying in Sydney, and I'd probably be 20% down on whatever I bought a few years ago if I hadn't have seen the writing on the wall by looking further than what the Daily Telegraph were telling me. Which, by the way, 3 years ago was the gold rush is never going to end type shit. Like, this is what makes me so frustrated about this. Like, the people that should care the most are just selling whichever dream is moving papers and advertising space. They're not linking back to like people that have, more accurately looked at this stuff, or that understand this stuff better, to actually get their advice. And because that's where most people are consuming it, they go in too hot and then they come off way too cold.
It's just, what can you do when the media are involved, right? Like,
just take advantage of it. You know what I mean? Like, that's all we can do. You just play the cycle and, try and put out good content so that people stop making poor decisions, really.
So to wrap it back around to the start, you have a problem, you find a solution.
Solutions. Look, I've loved doing this today, man. It was sick.
It's good fun.
For anyone that's still listening, please give us a review on the podcast, or give us a like on YouTube. Only if they're positive ones, of course. If you're not liking this stuff, then I don't know why you've just listened to us ramble for 2 hours. So go find another podcast. There's heaps of other cool property ones out there as well, which we like. But I'm super grateful. For those of you that are still here, I would love the opportunity to offer you a one-on-one strategy session where you and I, or you and my brother, will sit down and look at exactly where you are and where you want to be. Look at what's holding you back. Openly talk about other people's thoughts on the market, because I really don't have any. Like, I don't have a thought on the market personally. I just take little snippets from other people and then relay information. Like, that's what I've always done, and that's what I think's made me a better investor, because I'm constantly trying to learn and take in different stuff. And then we can talk about your property investment goals and what you're planning to do. And, you know, if long-term growth, long-term financial freedom, solid cash flow, and taking advantage of timing is something that you can stomach, that's cool. Like, jump over to the website www.pumpedonproperty and book in a session. And if that's not for you and you just, you know, want to wait a few years until things settle down a bit, you do you know what I mean? Like, keep stacking that money in the bank, and, you know, long term you'll be in a great position because of that as well. Like, we're certainly not, you know, saying that this is the most bullish market in Australian history. It's really a market where you've got to be aware. Certain markets are going to decline quite rapidly in the next few years. Other markets are going to sit flat. Other markets are setting up for the medium term for good future prospects. So, you know, certainly don't go rushing in and buying stuff just for the sake of it to say you own property. You know, get the right ideas in place and then see what you can do with that.
And ideas, by ideas you mean plan, right?
Like, we're not financial advisors, so we can't give you the plan. But, you know, there's ideas that, you know, like following what's worked in the past based on CoreLogic's data and Herentop White's data, that you can apply and that you can learn to put yourself in a way better position after 10 years of doing it than I've been able to get into, because I didn't know any of that stuff until about Property 8. But it's been sick catching up with you, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, dude.
Cheers, dude. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
See you later.